Okay, so let's jump right in. We're going to break down what happens when a city's whole economy transforms and how that can create something really rare in its housing market: balance. And today, our focus is on Winston-Salem, North Carolina. For the last few years, the national housing story has just been one of extreme after another. We've seen these insane bidding wars and prices just soaring, and then slam on the brakes with sharp slowdowns as interest rates shot up. It's been a dizzying ride for just about everyone. It's a word we really haven't heard much, right? Not a blistering hot seller's market, and definitely not a buyer's paradise, but something right in the middle. What does that even look like? How does that feel on the ground? Well, that is exactly what this explainer is all about. We're using the latest, most comprehensive analysis from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD for short, and we're going to unpack all the numbers to see what this unique market condition means for you, whether you're thinking about buying, selling, or renting. All right, first things first, you really can't understand a housing market without understanding the jobs that support it. In Winston-Salem's story, wow, it starts with a huge economic shift. So while a lot of people might still know it as the Camel City because of its history, the economy today looks completely different. And this isn't just, a facelift. It's a fundamental reinvention from the ground up. And this slide just perfectly illustrates that change. The old pillars of the economy, tobacco and textiles, they've given way to this modern knowledge-based economy. The city has totally pivoted to become this regional powerhouse for medicine, for higher education, and for tech. What's really interesting here is just the sheer dominance of this new economy. Education and health services, they're leading the pack, making up a massive 21% of all jobs in the area. This sector is clearly the engine that's driving the city forward. And here are the names behind those numbers. We're talking about giants like Atrium Health and Novant Health. These aren't just employers. They are economic anchors for the entire region. And when you add Wake Forest University to the mix, you get this incredibly stable foundation of high-quality jobs. So the crucial takeaway here is this: a strong, diverse economy has led to a remarkably strong job market. Get this, an unemployment rate of just 3.5%. That's the lowest it's been in over 2 decades. And it's this very specific kind of stability, one that's rooted in sectors that are less prone to wild economic swings. That's what creates the bedrock for a balanced housing market. Okay, so with that economic foundation in place, let's pivot to the housing market itself and see exactly how this translates into that rare condition we've been talking about: balance. So what do we really mean by balanced? Well, think of it like this. It's a market that isn't heavily tilted in favor of either the buyers or the sellers. There's enough supply out there to meet demand without creating, a total panic. But there's also enough demand to keep the market moving without causing chaos. It is the sweet spot. And here is the key piece of evidence. The market has 2.3 months of housing supply. Now, you might hear that and think, wait, isn't a perfectly balanced market usually considered 4 to 5 months? And you'd be right. But the key insight here for Winston-Salem is the direction of the trend. This is a huge easing from the super tight conditions of the last few years. It's a clear signal that we're moving away from a frantic seller's market and toward that equilibrium. And you know what? We see a really similar story on the rental side. An overall vacancy rate of 8.7% tells us that supply and demand are pretty well aligned. Landlords aren't staring at empty buildings, and renters aren't getting into bidding wars over a handful of listings. Again, it all points directly to stability. So, what does this balance mean for you if you're actually out there trying to buy a home? Let's break down the playbook. This chart right here really says it all for buyers. A year ago, there was only 1.6 months of supply. I mean, nothing. Today, that's up to 2.3 months. The huge takeaway is that you have more options, more breathing room, and way less direct competition than buyers had just 1 year ago. But here's the other side of that coin. A balanced market does not mean it's a cheap market. Prices are still going up, climbing 4% from last year. So while you definitely have more choices, affordability is still a really big factor. The days of those crazy double-digit price hikes have cooled off, but values are still growing steadily. All right, let's pivot and look at this from the seller side. If you're getting ready to put your home on the market, what's your strategy in this new normal? Well, the good news for sellers is pretty clear. Your investment is still growing. That 4% increase in the average sales price means you're likely to walk away with a pretty solid return. The value is definitely there. However, and this is a big however, the number of actual homes being sold has dropped by 18%. So what does that mean for you as a seller? It means that while you can still get a good price, finding the right buyer might take a little more time and a bit more strategy than it did a year ago. The market is just no longer on autopilot for sellers. Now let's turn to the rental market, where one word really, truly defines the current climate, and that word is stability. Just look at how steady these numbers are. The average apartment rent only went up by $16 over an entire year. And the vacancy rate? It barely budged, moving from 8.5 to 8.6%. For renters and for landlords, this just spells predictability. You're not seeing wild rent hikes, and you're not seeing major swings in availability. So, we've seen where the market is right now, but where is it headed? Let's wrap things up by looking at the official forecast for the next 3 years. This data gives us a really clear picture of what's coming next. It's forecasting a demand for over 11,000 new homes for sale and almost 2,000 new rental units. Now, what's really interesting is that the current construction pipeline is only going to meet a fraction of that sales demand at first, which suggests that the market is probably going to stay stable and competitive for a while. Ultimately, all of this data points to a market that rewards patience over panic. For buyers, it's about waiting for the right property to come along without that constant fear of it vanishing in a few hours. For sellers, it's about pricing your home strategically and being patient enough to wait for the right buyer. So the question really becomes, in a market that's not giving anyone a huge, unfair advantage, how are you going to plan to win?